Hey, Miss Surly. How are you? Hey, Fancy Lou Who. How are you, darling? How's everybody doing today? Y'all ready for this? Give us nightmares. My day started off with work from here at home. Thank goodness. Then I had to go to the doctor this afternoon, to the stomach doctor. I'm still having stomach problems, and he's going to run a scope down me, the EGD, Tuesday. If you can find anything else that might be going on that's wrong. Find us some music.
Hold the phone. Connected.
Thank you. Let me show you the whole outfit. And then I got on, these are like leggings that are not quite. So, got this off Amazon. I'm just paying my rent every day. Yeah, I got the pants from Cato's, but then I got the. I have a bra. My boobs are up here, not down here. They ain't near as big as I. If I was half as big here as I look on there, man, I would have like watermelons. Hey, Neener Beaner. Am I going to have a author tonight? Do you know? Does anybody know? Oh, I'm getting ready to get started. Yeah, this is a psychological thriller. Have I ever read one of these on here? I'm sure I have, but I just not placing it at the moment. Okay. Let's get to 8:05 and then I'll. Do you guys know anybody else that's going to show up tonight? Can't quit yawning tonight. Tired. It's rainy. It's stormy. It's going to supposed to storm tonight. It's rainy. Yucky, 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 yucky. So, one more minute. I'll get to 8:05. Ought to be a good one. Is music loud enough? Mm. All right, let's get started. Tiny bit louder. This place is called the Back Porch. So this is a Willie Nelson song I've never heard. Sounds like he wrote it yesterday. Okay. I ache in the places where I used to play, and I'm crazy for love, but I'm not coming home. Let's get started. Before I go to sleep. All right, prologue. It was late when John entered the Blue Note in Mannheim. I'm going to say it's Mannheim, Germany, to meet with Velda. Sweat gathered on his face as he was dreading the conversation that was about to take place. He had received new orders from his commander, orders that would take him to Fort Drum, New York. Velda would not be going with him. Velda had already questioned him as to why he didn't just come to her apartment, as it was conveniently located across the street from the Blue Note. He had taken a seat as he awaited her arrival, wiping sweaty palms on his dress blue pants. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that they were both aware that wherever the army sent him is where he must go. A jingling sound tinkled, signifying the door opening. John glanced at it, seeing the beautiful woman he has come to care for during his stay in Germany. He politely stood as she made her way to him with a smile on her face. Even as a surgeon for the army, his hands have never been less steady as they were then, as Velda sat across from him. The smile died on Velda's face as she gazed into John's eyes. He had always been open and honest with her, telling her he was married with a young daughter. His wife was beautiful with blonde hair and long legs compared to Velda's petite frame and dark complexion. She also knew his wife had been very sickly since their baby had been born, but she asked no questions. She enjoyed their time together, but Velda had made a mistake. She had fallen in love with a married man, a man who made no doubt as to his loyalty to his family, and now he was leaving Germany and she may never see him again. They held hands across the table as Velda allowed the tears to stream down her face. She had been a fool living in a fantasy world. To think that the doctor would even consider leaving his wife and child for her was almost laughable. Been there, done that. Don't ever, ever, ever do that. If he's married, just walk away. John reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Please take this, Velda. She knew it contained money. He had always been very generous with her, but now she turned on him in disgust. And I'm not speaking German because I couldn't even begin to do it. I'm not taking your money, John. I'm not your whore. I lay with you because I love you. Don't you realize that? I'm sorry, baby. I love you too. You must know how much I'll miss you. Don't, she cried out. Don't lie to yourself or to me. And you don't love me, and we both know this. You just feel guilty. You'll forget about me as soon as your plane takes off. She slides her hand out and quickly takes the envelope. But I will take your offer of help because I'm going to need it. Now, as he looked at her for the last time, he realized that she seemed different to him somehow, however. He had too much on his mind that night to pay attention. He had to pack up his things and get back to his wife. She never got up when he stood to leave. She didn't offer to return his hug. If you ever need anything, Velda, please contact me. You know where I'll be stationed." Velda watched John as he walked out the door before getting up, slowly rubbing the beginning of her swollen belly as she did so. She was 4 months pregnant, and he had noticed nothing different about her. She kept the secret to herself. In time, she gave birth to a boy, a big baby with a severe cleft palate. She never told John, although she couldn't help but wonder how happy he would have been to have a son, or would he? She would leave the baby sleeping in the apartment at night while she worked the night shift at the bar down the street. There was a fire one night, and it quickly engulfed the apartment building. No one knew how it started, but it caught Velda in the stairwell when it collapsed. She fell through to the bottom. The fire department rescued her. The fall saved her life since there were few survivors, and it trapped almost everyone in the upstairs apartments inside. She was unconscious in the hospital for several weeks. When she woke up and asked about her baby, the nurses looked at her in surprise. "What baby?" they asked. She had kept her baby such a secret that no one knew to look for him. She was informed that there were very few survivors. Since her child was just a baby, she figured he must be one of the deceased. She threw her hands to her face in a silent scream, never mentioning her baby again to anyone. Velda never talked to the authorities about the child. There was nothing they could have done for her at that point, and she blamed them for the loss of her baby. If she was honest with herself, she was a little relieved that he wouldn't have to grow up deformed. This was her way of absolving herself of any guilt. She hadn't been working the night that the apartment caught fire. She'd finally met a man, maybe someone who would help her forget her doctor. When she arrived at the building, seeing the flames engulfing it, she had tried to run up the stairs to get to her son. The baby would have been 2 years old. Velda had no family to speak of in Germany. She had been on her own for a long time, but now she needed help. She placed a call to the doctor. Velda looked around her in awe as the plane landed at the airport in New York City in the United States. She marveled at all the beautiful lights and pulled her coat closer to guard against the cold night air. She had finally taken John up on his offer for help and called him after losing all her possessions in the fire. His wife was very ill with cancer, and he needed help with his daughter, Angie. He was a plastic surgeon as well as a psychologist, and he stayed very busy. He welcomed her with open arms, and she thanked God for bringing her back to her doctor, even if it was only to be a housekeeper babysitter. She would care for his wife and child, and she was always there for him when he needed her. Velda was content in her new life. She soon forgot all about the baby she'd lost, and she never told the doctor they'd had a son. When his wife succumbed to the illness, Velda was there to comfort the doctor and his daughter, Angie. That was many years ago. Present day. Did I tell you guys what I'm reading? It's Scream While I Whisper, a suspense thriller. It's book 1 in the Scream for Me series by Sherry Hutchison. And it is $3.99 on Amazon. Angie awoke with a start, a scream frozen on her lips, rendering her mute, unable to make a sound, even if she wanted to. Paralyzed with fear, rivulets of sweat beaded on her forehead, now mixing with the tears threatening to fall from her golden eyelashes. Her eyes, a dark gold, widened in fright, searching the darkness, the debilitating feeling of helplessness she once felt returning. Gosh, how she felt the fear, so sharp it cut through her chest as if someone were plunging a knife into her all over again. Her hand subconsciously went to the long scar on her ribcage just under her left breast. Something was very wrong. Where was the nightlight, and why wasn't it on? They always left it on, even during the day. She couldn't stand being in the dark, even during the daylight hours. She always had a nightlight on, ever since that horrible night 6 years ago, or was it only yesterday? The pain, still so sharp, always fresh in her mind. It permeated her very soul, night and day. Then she heard it. And as the voice spoke, Angie covered her ears with her hands as if to block out that horrible memory. No, she was thinking, this can't be happening again. But it was. She'd never forget the voice that whispers. It came softly at first, in a quiet whisper. Turn this down just a little bit so I can do this right. Oops, too far. Okay. Angie. Then again it whispered, Angie. Then came the loud, hysterical laughing. Just as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The whisper came again. Angie. It repeated. Angie, my Angie, I'm back. I found you at last. Finally, her paralysis broken, she let loose with a blood-curdling scream, one that would bring the whole household to her bedside. Sam, Angie's bodyguard, came rushing in, grasping his 9mm in one hand while looking for the cause of the commotion. As he reached out to turn on the overhead light to her room, they both see it. A small tape recorder sitting on her bedside table, sitting upright, dead center of the stand, making it hard to miss. As he reached over to shut it off, Angie fell apart, completely screaming. No, not again. I'm so sick of this. Why don't you just leave me alone? Crying profusely now, she loses control, raging, screaming, and crying at the unfairness of what had happened to her. At the young age of 23, Angie Winston felt older than time. The nightmare began 6 years ago when she was 17, and the whispered voice with its slight slur brings everything rushing forward. Sam searched the closet, the bathroom, under the bed, and the double doors leading out to the balcony. The doors were locked securely and bolted from the inside. He confirmed that the security system was still working and intact. No one could have entered the house, so where did the tape recorder come from? He needed to check out some things downstairs, however. He didn't want to leave Angie alone in her current condition. Where was Velda, the housekeeper? Standing at the entrance to Angie's room, he called out multiple times. Velda, where are you? Get in here quick! Everything was secure as far as all the doors and locks in Angie's room, but he was responsible for Angie's safety, especially when her father was out of town. He dreaded the call he was going to have to make to the doctor. Dr. John Winston was a busy professional. He was away often at medical conventions. Just then, Velda came running in as she spied Angie shaking and curled up with a blanket wrapped over her shoulders. She ran straight to her. Velda had joined their family many years ago when she'd come to the United States from Germany. No one, including the doctor, was sure about her age. Sam had guessed her to be in her early 40s, but could find no records of any kind on her. She'd taken care of Mrs. Winston, who had succumbed to lung cancer many years ago. What had started as a part-time maid and nanny had ended up with her being a full-time housekeeper and nanny. She was already there when Sam joined them several years later. They would have been lost without Velda. The doctor swore to Sam that he could trust her to take care of his daughter, but she could not protect her from this madman, whoever he was. That's where Sam came into the picture. The doctor would expect a call from Sam first, even though he knew he should contact the police first. That would be the proper protocol, but Dr. Winston didn't care about protocol with his daughter. He was used to having his orders followed, and he was used to getting what he wanted. But this is a call that Sam was dreading. Someone had breached his line of security. This could cost him his job and the respect he had earned from the doctor all these years. He'd been with the Winstons for several years now, and Dr. Winston had hired him to do what had started out as a routine security job on a new office back in New York. But then the nightmare had started, and they pulled Sam into it all. He'd then been promoted as a private bodyguard for a 17-year-old girl who should have never been known the terror that had entered her life. First, Sam had questions that needed answering. He pointed to the tape recorder as he pulled out a pair of black rubber gloves from his jacket pocket. Velda looked very nervous now and started gently crying because she now realized she'd made a big mistake. Velda, he asked. Do you know where the hell this came from? While asking her, he picked up the tape recorder. He picked the tape recorder up with his gloved hand, slowly turning it around to look at it. It was small and appeared to be electronically controlled. Yes, she answered quickly, but I can explain. Oh my goodness, child, she cried as she put her arms around Angie's shoulders in a comforting manner. Sam was losing his patience. He had things to do and calls to make. Velda, talk quickly. I need the answers now. What do you know about this tape recorder and what do you need to explain? By now, he could tell by her actions and responses that she was guilty of something. He had never bonded with her like Dr. Winston and Angie. He had always felt like there was something hidden just underneath all that nice smiling exterior. He didn't know why he felt this way about her, but he did. He had learned to trust his instincts years ago. Velda regained her composure, cleared her throat, and stood up. She spoke quickly now, explaining how she'd received the tape recorder from special delivery this afternoon. Dr. John Winston addressed and signed it, or so she had thought. Dr. John Winston addressed and signed it, or so she had thought. Wait a minute. I'll get the note, she whispered as she ran downstairs to the other room and came back with the packaging it had come in. And here's the note that was in it. She handed it to Sam. You'll see for yourself. It looks just like Dr. Winston's handwriting and signature. Angie calmed down enough, thanks to Velda's comforting arms, that she glanced over at the package covering and nodded. Yeah, it looks like Dad's writing, she whispered, but he would never, ever send such a horrible tape. I mean, this is all crazy. She grabbed her head as hysteria tried to pull her back into its grasp. Sam still had the gloves on and was reading the note. He didn't expect the police to find anyone's fingerprints but Velda's, but he hoped maybe someone had slipped up and left maybe just one print for them to go on. The note only had a few lines of instructions. Sam noticed they addressed the note to Velda by name. It directed her to place the tape recorder by Angie's bed at precisely 1 a.m. and continued to explain that this was a new experimental relaxation tape. He wanted to know how Angie responded the next morning and if it helped her sleep better. The note even told Velda how grateful he was to have her there to help watch over his precious Angie, and that there was no need to bother Sam with this, that he had enough to keep him busy. Dr. John Winston's signature was on it. Sam read and reread the note several times. Several things deeply disturbed him about the note. This did not come from the doctor, of that he was sure. Whoever wrote this referred to Velda by name and referred to his name, and Dr. Winston would never use the phrase, his precious Angie, because that's what the sick fuck used to say to Angie when he had her. This could only mean one thing. The bastard had somehow crawled out from under whatever rock he had been hiding under and had found them after all these years. Or someone had a very sick sense of humor. And if it was the Whisperer, then he knew where they lived and was sending a bold statement. Angie was not safe anymore. Sam looked up from the note, still deep in thought. Both of you sit tight. Got it? It's him, isn't it? Angie cried. He's found me. I'll never be safe. Never have a normal life. Not until he's dead. That's the only way he'll stop, Sam. Angie whispered shakily to Sam. He was her protector and safety net. He was the one who had found her and rescued her back from that dark, wet, smelly dungeon cage the Whisperer had locked her in. Angie, I won't sugarcoat it, but yes, it could very well be that psycho. For now, let's just try to remain calm. Turning to Velda, Sam continues with his line of questioning. So, Velda, I can see where you might be fooled by this note, but come on. You, of all people, should know that the doctor would never tell you not to let me in on what's going on. I mean, really, a tape recorder? Can I assume you never listened to it? Velda was crying profusely now. I'm so sorry. I got complacent and careless after all these years. She looked at Angie again. I'm so sorry, child. Angie whispered, It's all right, Velda. I know it was an accident, but please stop calling me child. I know my emotions are all over the place, but I'm 23, not 3. We've got to work together, Velda, Sam stated firmly. Do you understand how serious this could have been? I know you've never liked me, but you must let me do my job here. I've got to call the doctor, and this is a call I dread, believe me. He whispered the last part to himself while shaking his head. Okay, Sam stated. You two stay put for a bit, okay? Velda, get anything Angie may need until I get back. Oh, and one more question, Velda. Why did it take you so long to respond? Respond? She questioned. What do you mean? Now his patience was running thin. Either Velda was being vague about her answers or he was just too worked up right now to be objective. So he took a deep breath and explained like he would to a child. You said you placed the tape recorder in here about midnight, which puts it after the time I checked Angie's room before she headed to bed. You understood it'd be coming on somehow, supposedly by itself. Yet I called out for you more than once, and it still took you a while to get here, looking half asleep. Oh, and now Velda understood what he was getting at. Well, I never stay up past 10 p.m., and I take a pill to help me sleep. So when the note told me to place the recorder in Angie's room by 1 a.m., and stated it would come on automatically, I thought no more about it since I thought this was John's instructions. So I took my pill as soon as I reached my room. That's why I barely heard you and was slow to respond. Is that a good enough reason for my delay? You could tell she did not like being questioned, but she understood that the doctor would ask these same questions and she didn't want to lose her position here after all these years. Okay, Sam nodded slowly. He started downstairs again. Wait, where are you going? Angie asked him. The thought of him leaving her, even with Velda there, terrified her. She glanced over at her bedroom windows. Are you sure they're locked, Sam? Yes, but I'll check again for you, all right? We might all be sleeping with a knife under our pillows tonight. He also made sure the outside balcony light was on before he ran downstairs. He had already checked the night light, but the bulb appeared to have burned out, so there didn't seem to be a sign of foul play. Sam hurried quietly down the hall. He had a small bedroom off to the right next to Angie's. He confirmed his door was still locked, just as he had left it. He had a security camera system set up in here, as well as the doctor's office downstairs. In fact, he had just set his watch alarm for his normal 4 hour sleep when all the commotion had started. He did regular checks every 4 hours like clockwork. He always kept both rooms locked. Sam had instructed Velda not to bother cleaning either of these rooms. Across the hall was Velda's bedroom and bathroom. He quickly looked in the closet, under the bed, and the bathroom. He checked her windows. They were locked and secured. He noticed a small bottle of pills on the bathroom counter and read the prescription label. They were to treat mild arthritis and cause drowsiness. He felt a little bad for being so tough on her, but his job was to keep both her and Angie safe. At the far opposite end of the hall, past the stairs, was the master suite that the doctor used when he was home. Sam quickly checked all the windows, as well as the closet, bathroom, and under the bed. This room also had a balcony, and he checked the doors to make sure they were locked. He made his way quietly downstairs. Sam could move fast and was very quiet most of the time. He was always thinking and planning. He had to convince the doctor that this house had too many exterior doors. There were the large double front doors and a side French door that went out to a private patio area. There was the back door that led to a pool. Once in a while, he would take a quick dive while doing rounds. The doctor and Angie both had patio doors in their bedrooms. Too many doors like this was not a good idea when you had security issues like they've had for the past several years. The security cameras were state of the art, the best that money could buy, and he was fixing to get on them now and check some things out. But first, he needed to check back up on Velda and Angie before making the call to the doctor. Sam was feeling somewhat relieved, having confirmed that his perimeter of safety hadn't been breached, except for this disturbing package they'd received. He'd made his way back upstairs to the ladies. Velda was sitting on the bed talking quietly with Angie, and they both seemed to have calmed down a bit. Okay, ladies, Sam spoke in what was to be a soothing voice, except it never came out quite that soothing. Probably because he was such a big guy, but Angie loved him like the older brother she didn't have, and he'd die or kill to protect her. She knew that with all her heart. Sam looked over at Velda. I know you're tired, but maybe you could get Angie some hot chocolate before you go to bed. Angie sat up in bed at his words, clenching her fist. Hot what? I'm not a child. What I need is a normal life. Huh. Hot chocolate will not fix this, she mumbled. She turned on the TV next to her bed, channel surfing. Well, I'm exhausted, Velda whispered. Oh, sure, Velda, go get some rest. Sam responded. I'll take care of Angie before contacting her father. Once the door closed behind Velda, Sam turned to Angie. Hey, Angie, Sam says sweetly, turning on the charm. Maybe you should try a hot, relaxing bath with some good music, and I'll throw in a glass of wine. Oh, I get it, she responded. You want to call and talk to Dad away from me, don't you? Yeah, you got it, he nodded. He poured her a glass of wine out of the mini fridge in her bedroom as Angie made her way to her joint bathroom to run her bubble bath, soothingly scented with lavender. She undressed and climbed into the tub, allowing the bubbles to settle over her exposed skin just before Sam entered with the wine. Within a few minutes, Angie was feeling the effects of the wine in her clawfoot tub full of warm water. She knew her dad would spare no expense for her happiness. They'd always been close, and except for Velda, only had each other since her mom passed away. Angie no longer had much of a life to speak of. Her friends had stopped calling or coming over years ago because she refused to leave the house out of fear that he would find her. Besides, all her high school friends lived in New York, where Angie and her father used to live. Only her best childhood friend, Shelley, faithfully kept in touch. Angie had no idea why Shelley kept at it because she knew she'd been distant and almost rude to her, as if this whole thing was her fault. Angie hated herself for being so weak and scared. All her friends were going to college and getting engaged or married now. Her dad had moved them here to California years ago, and while it was beautiful here, this wasn't her home. She missed New York. She'd fallen into a self-pity mode, and now she lived a lonely, isolated life in this big, beautiful house, trapped in her own self-imposed isolation. But she knew her dad had to be suffering as well, even though he'd never complained. He deserved to have a life with someone instead of spending every waking moment worrying about her and what what about poor Sam? She shook her head. He spent day after day watching over her. Something had to change for them all. Meanwhile, it was about 2:30 a.m. in California when Sam makes the dreaded call to Dr. Winston in New York, where he was speaking at a medical convention. It would be about 5:30 a.m. there, and the doctor should be getting up soon, if not already. He had just finished a week-long lecturing class to psychology. Unlike California, here in late March, where it's nice and sunny, the doctor was dealing with cold and rainy weather. Sam knew one thing as he dialed John's number. They had to make some serious changes and catch this sick freak, or none of them would ever live a normal life again. They couldn't go on living like this. The doctor wouldn't like some of his ideas, but he'd have to convince him somehow. Waking to his phone going off. That's my song, y'all. You know I like this song. John Winston knew something was wrong the moment he heard Sam's voice. He looked at his clock and knew he'd never be calling him now unless it was an emergency. Sam wasted no time in getting to the point. Where did the package come from? The doctor demanded. Dr. Winston then listened as Sam hurriedly filled him in on everything. He interrupted Sam long enough to confirm what Sam already knew, that no, he had not sent such a package to Velda. This means only one thing: the Whisperer is back, and he had found them. John Winston had lulled himself into a false sense of security when he had bought his new home nestled securely on top of a private cul de sac surrounded by 10 acres of a steep hillside and cliffs facing out over the Pacific Ocean. Security cameras surrounded the house and front driveway, as well as the back fence that spanned the backyard. He knows their address and he'll try to come for Angie. John was sick with dread. He was so tired of what damage has already been done and was thinking that they had to step up their game and catch this bastard, whoever he was. This had to stop for all their sakes. Oh, crap. We might. Let's see. John, Sam addressed the doctor by his first name. He would only do this in times of duress, and no one else had ever heard Sam call the doctor by it. But they had been through a lot together, much more than anyone realized. Do you want me to get the police over here now? I believe we need to get a report to them, although I don't have much faith that they'll be able to do much good. Yes, Sam, John responded. Call them and tell them to get their asses over here now to get a report. You must spoon feed them only the information they need to know, just like we did back in New York. Yes, sir. I'll get right on it, Sam responded. Oh, and one more thing, Sam. The doctor spoke slowly and quietly. It's time we call out the big guns. We're going to need some help on this. Do you understand? I want this sick bastard dead. I have no intention of turning him over to the police. Yes, sir. I agree, Sam responded as he hung up. John Winston slowly went back about packing his clothes as he made a call to arrange for a flight out today. With the weight of worry, fear, and helplessness, he moved much slower than his 59 years. As he packed, he remembered back to when it all started. Angie had just turned 17. She was so excited about the upcoming prom and graduation. They had accepted her into several universities, and she had her pick because of her excellent grade point average. She knew she wanted to go into the medical field, but hadn't decided for sure which area. Back then, she had had all the time in the world. She was a good kid, a beautiful young lady with a good head on her shoulders. He sat down on the edge of the bed. Thinking of it made him feel like he was going crazy. So, how was anyone supposed to expect his daughter to get through this? The doctor was remembering it all now as he made his way down the elevator to the cab waiting to take him to the airport. It had been April the 15th, a day forever welded into his memory. That horrible day had changed their lives so many ways. It had been a cold Thursday New York night, and Angie had called him to let him know she'd be getting late home from school. She was meeting with the drama club to go over plans for their upcoming dance that Saturday. He remembered asking her if she had a way home since it was still very cold in April in New York. He was very protective of his daughter. Even though he trusted her to make good decisions, he still worried about his beautiful daughter. She had promised to grab a cab if she didn't catch a ride with her friend Shelley. Angie hated the code, which was amusing because she loved living in New York. That night, the doctor was still seeing patients as late as 7 p.m. when he received a call from their housekeeper, Velda. She was going out to dinner with her friend and wanted to know if she should fix dinner for Angie or the doctor since neither of them was home yet. Velda had, in fact, called the doctor twice, but he was tied up with a patient. Velda was rambling on about how she had left 2 messages for Angie, 2 for him, and how did they expect her to run a household if no one could at least return her calls. She only saw her friend twice a month to go to dinner and dancing. It was the only time Velda ever asked off for herself. John also tried calling Angie with no response. With no answer or return call, a great big red flag shot up that something was wrong. He remembered looking at his watch that evening and the time was 7:05 p.m. John was lost in time as memories came flooding back like they were yesterday. He had dialed Angie's cell, and when it went to voicemail, he tried a second time. Nothing. He dialed her friend Shelley and reached her. She'd explained she had to leave school early because of a bad toothache, so she hadn't seen Angie since around 2 p.m. that afternoon. Shelley gave him the drama teacher's phone number. Normally, drama club would let out by 5 p.m., but Shelley thought it could have run over because of prom coming up. At that moment, the doctor remembered being concerned and maybe even a little irritated that Angie hadn't at least let Velda know she was running late getting home, since she knew Thursday nights were very important to Velda. John hung up with Shelley and called the school to be able to get in touch with the drama teacher. Being informed by the receptionist that drama club has ended for the day, John explained his worry. After he had explained his concern, they gave him the drama teacher's personal number. Irritation at the delay in finding out the information he needs forms into fear at the teacher's words once she answers the phone and he bombards her with questions. They had finished up much earlier tonight than she had expected they would. In fact, it had been around 4:30 p.m. She told the doctor she herself saw Angie get into one of those New York yellow cabs. Angie had used the taxi service plenty of times when it was rainy or cold out, never having a problem getting home before. Thursday evening, April 15th, Angie Winston had gone missing from her high school at 4:30 p.m. She'd jumped into a yellow cab, number unknown, and had vanished. John Winston, the famous renowned plastic surgeon, hadn't even known his daughter was missing until after 7 p.m. that night. Sam had just hired on as a security officer at the doctor's office a few weeks earlier. Both Sam and the doctor shared some dark past together and knew people who it was. Well, let's just say better to not have any acquaintances with, but sometimes life throws you a monkey wrench. John Winston's offices had been vandalized several times, and he was fed up with it. Sam was the son of someone whom the doctor had served with in the Special Forces many years ago. After his dad was killed in action, Sam had gone to live on the streets since his mom was too involved with her promising career as a nightclub singer to pay much attention to him. He had had several run-ins with the police, and his name was in their black book, so to speak. The doctor remembered his first meeting with Sam. He was an enormous guy who moved stealthily fast and quiet. He had worn his long black hair in a tight braid that hung down his back. He had worn a black V-neck t-shirt with worn jeans. A black leather jacket concealed a handgun that John only glimpsed. With a silent nod of approval, he realized that Sam packed his own protection. All Sam had asked for was to sleep on a sofa in one of the back offices, guaranteeing he'd catch whoever was breaking into the offices. He kept that promise, plus some. He'd broken both arms of one perp and thrown the other guy over an upstairs balcony. The intruders tried to sue him for doing his job. Dr. Winston shook his head as if to clear out the ugly memories, but they refused to go. There was a lot he didn't know about Sam, but it set one thing in stone. Sam and Sam alone had found his daughter Angie and brought her home. Not the New York Police Department. They hadn't even started looking for her yet. They'd figured she was a spoiled little daddy's girl who went off key riding around New York spending some of her famous father's money. They were so wrong on so many things that night. As soon as Sam saw the look on the doctor's face that night, got the lowdown on the situation, he jumped into action without questions. He knew the streets and how cruel and dangerous they could be for a regular person, let alone for a young, innocent girl. Somehow, Sam had gone out and traced down every yellow cab that had ever taken a route around her school. The doctor never asked him too many questions, and he paid off several private lawsuits from unhappy people who had gotten in Sam's way that Thursday night. Other than a few retired friends, Dr. Winston held nothing but disdain for most of the New York Police Department. While the PD had been playing games that night, treating his daughter's disappearance as nothing, his baby girl was being assaulted and tortured by some sick fuck. She had put up a good fight in the cab, but he still slit her rib cage under her left breast so deep that he almost severed her rib. He also used a taser on her. She had woken up in some black as hell, smelly cave like structure lying on a dirty mattress on the floor, naked. He had removed all her clothing and she was freezing cold. Since he wore a mask the whole time, she could not identify him. He always spoke in a whisper. Ah! I said naked, didn't I? Look what happened when I said naked. All right. Angie still wouldn't talk about it much, but she assured her father that she had not been raped. Her kidnapper just had not had time yet. In the 6 years since that night, she had only spoken to a couple of female officers who had been very nice to her. Otherwise, she had said nothing. She had nothing to say. She talked in a monotone voice as if she were trying hard to cut off any emotion or feelings about that night. In fact, Angie had never really talked about what happened. She really wasn't sure what had happened, as her memory was fuzzy on the details. She would scream, cry, and then hug herself. She totally cut off herself from her friends and from any prior life she had had. He had been bald when she pulled the wig off his head. She remembered that much, and that he may have had a speech impediment. Something about the way his words slurred, even though he whispered. He had big fat hands. She would scream every time she mentioned his hands. No one may ever know why he left her that night, locked in a cage, whispering that he had to get a surprise for her before they could have their ceremony. He said it was her fault. He had left it in the car and now he had to go get it. He was so mad she thought he was going to kill her. She wished he had. She remembered his consistent mumbling about the dress that he had to get for her and that she was perfect. He called her his perfect little princess. Sam had just missed the whisperer by mere minutes that night. He found Angie locked in a dark dungeon cage underneath the New York subway. He owed everything to his homeless buddies that night. They had really come through for him when he had told them he needed their help. He had always fed several of them who lived down in the tunnels. When he gathered them that night and told them he was looking for a young white female, they rallied together to help him, with the promise of all the whiskey and coffee they could drink. That's all they asked for, coffee and whiskey. A few of the tunnel dwellers had been terrified because the stranger had been down there before and he had had other women down there. They would hear the women screaming before they went quiet, but were too frightened to help. One of them held his hands over his ears as if to drown out the ugly memories. Their descriptions of him were like how Angie would later describe to him that he was a huge man with abnormally big hands. He always wore a long wig and a hat on his head, and because of the fit, they knew it wasn't real. Since they all feared, feared him, if they saw him, they would scurry away to their hiding places. When asked if they could describe his face, they all swore he wore a rubbery mask over it. Some were sure it was made of skin. When Angie first saw Sam that night, she thought he was the whisperer coming back to finish her, and she cowered in the corner holding the tiny flashlight that the whisperer had probably inadvertently dropped. She did not know if he had planned on leaving it or had gotten rattled because she had put up such a fight. She knew he had cut her very badly as the blood continued to flow from the open wound. Sam heard her crying in the dark and at first thought it was a kitten mewling. "Hey, I'm not here to hurt you," he told her hurriedly. "My name is Sam, and your dad sent me to bring you home. But we've got to hurry. Sam had whipped out a small black bag he always carried with him containing useful items in different scenarios. He broke the lock on the cage with a bolt cutter, tossing aside the chain and lock before entering the cage that she was in and covered her as best as he could with a small blanket he had. That was the first look he got of how badly injured she was. He could see how badly her rib cage had been cut under her breast. The blood was pouring out of her wound. He could see what looked like little burn marks on her neck and chest, probably from a taser gun. Sam wanted to hurt whoever had done this to the poor girl. With fear shining in her eyes, wildly glancing about, making her appear younger than she was, Angie reminded him of his baby sister, crying and speaking frantically as she gripped his jacket in her hands. He's coming back. He's coming back with the dress. Please help me. She whimpered, and with that, Angie Winston fell unconscious. It would be several days before she could talk to anyone. It would be several years before she healed. She never knew that Sam removed his jacket and put it on her before wrapping her in the blanket he'd brought. He gently picked her up and took her to her father. Sam hung up from speaking with the doctor. He had his instructions. He too remembered that day, 6 years ago, while he dialed the number to the police department to make a report. They'd never been able to get a clear picture of what this creep looked like. The police had dragged their heels and didn't want the public to know that some security guard from the streets had solved their crime before they knew there was one. They were more worried about their polished reputation. The Whisperer continued to terrorize them for almost 2 years, constantly evading Sam and the police. Then, wham, he stopped just like that. Sam had hoped he'd got crushed underneath some rock or something, even as something kept tugging at the tip of Sam's mind. There was something off about the whole thing. Sam checked on Angie, seeing that she had made her way back to her bed and had finally dozed off before making the call to the local authorities. It was almost 4 a.m., and he was being met with subpar service, mounting his frustration. After giving his name and explaining the reason for his call, a very droll sounding desk sergeant responded with, This is the California. This is California, and the original crime, as they had put it, had happened in New York. What, 6 years ago? Sam explained that Dr. Winston had made a complete report explaining the seriousness of this when he bought the house all those years ago and moved Angie here. Several detectives had worked the case for almost 2 years, and yes, he understood what the desk sergeant was telling him, that so far the only crime you have to report is a tape recording that had come in the mail. He went on talking about how department heads had changed in the last 5 years, and most of the original detectives who had worked this case had transferred out or retired. He stated he would give this report to the 6 a.m. detective when he comes on duty. Besides, they'd have to pull the original records from New York. By now, Sam had had a very long night, and he exploded on the desk sergeant. The victim's name is Angie Winston, age 23, and yes, she's all right, just shook up. Thanks for asking about her. You may have heard of her father, Dr. John Winston. If you don't know who he is, then you're very new there, just plain stupid, or both. I can tell you for sure, though, that I wouldn't want to be in your shoes when I report to him that you don't think his daughter's life is worth very much. Oh, and he'll be flying in from New York within the next few hours. You better get your head out of your ass and pull all the files on the Whisperer and Angie Winston, because he has followed her here to California. By now, he was yelling, and he didn't care. I'll tell you, if that sick fuck comes onto this property, there's going to be a lot of bloodshed. Just get your ass over here now. With that, he hung up. Well, that should get their attention, he thought, while taking several deep breaths. He ran his hands over his head as if that would make the terrible headache that was forming would go away. Sam was not a man of many words, so that he had to do so much talking tonight would alert those that knew him to stay out of his way. He smiled to himself, wondering if the sergeant had pulled the record yet. He didn't even have a very good reputation with the local police. In fact, He had had several run-ins with them, and they were smart enough to be just a little scared of him. Sam didn't like to play head games and had absolutely no patience for ignorance. He considered most of the police department to be blind, ignorant fools. He had locked horns, so to speak, more than once with the locals when working a case. If it hadn't been for Dr. Winston's considerable ties and influence, Sam wasn't sure how things would have turned out for him. Dr. Winston had assisted the detective several times over the years when a case needed professional consulting, and he had remained close friends with two particularly well-known detectives whom he introduced Sam to when he had taken him under his wing years ago. Few people knew much about Sam or his past. His name was Sam, and what information given about out by the doctor or himself was on a very limited need-to-know basis. He owed the doctor more than his life and career. In fact, Sam owed John his very sanity. Sam would not hesitate to hurt, defend, cause bodily harm, or even kill to protect the doctor and his daughter. On this, they both had an understanding. I'm trying to decide. Okay. The Whisperer stood in the cold, dark, damp room, smiling serenely to himself, looking upward as if to pray to the heavens themselves, as if anyone up there would even listen to a prayer uttered from him. He'd surely given up any hope of that a long time ago. He'd gone over to the dark side long before he'd found his perfect little girl in Angie. Some would say he'd never had a chance, but that was all he'd ever known. What was that saying? Visit the sins of the fathers on their children? Except he'd never known his real father or mother. All the Whisperer had ever known was darkness, torture, beating, starvation, and anger. Lots of anger. Oh, the sweet delight, he uttered. Oh, the sweet delight, he uttered. His words made sense to no one but himself. In fact, no one had been around for years. Keeping to himself, he stayed hidden in his underground home, for better use of a word. His childhood was a blur. He didn't really remember how he came to be in New York City, but he had survived there for many years until recently. He came to California to get his Angie. His hideout all those years in New York had been perfect. They would not have found him in a million years. No one would have ever thought to look for him way down in the tunnels. The few unfortunate vagrants and homeless bums who had made the mistake of coming across him never lived to tell a soul. They were all spoiled people. They want all their pretty things but are afraid to get their hands dirty. Until that man, Sam, had come along. He messed everything up that night all those years ago. All the planning that the Whisperer had gone through to take his Angie had been for nothing. He knew as soon as he saw her outside the doctor's office that day that she was the one and would be his. It was just a matter of time before he found out where she attended school. When he found out later she was Dr. John Winston's daughter, it made everything all that much sweeter. All right. This little section I'm getting ready to read is going to be it, so get ready. That night, he left her in a temporary cage so he could return to get the dress he had left behind in the vehicle. She was a tiny thing, and it surprised him that the fight she had in her. It had not been in his plans to hurt or cut her, but he felt no remorse. It was her fault. She should have behaved and heeded his words. He had not planned on killing her like the ones before her. She was his chosen one. She was the one he'd marry. That was why he needed the dress. He knew she liked pretty things, but they had moved the cab. When he had returned to it, and there were too many people hanging around. It took longer to retrieve the dress than he planned. He realized now he should have forgotten the dress and just left it. When he had returned, he found her gone. Now, even thinking about that night drove him into a frenzy. He returned to the tunnels and found old Kino, the vagrant who made the mistake of sleeping in his regular spot that night. Kino told the Whisperer that a man who called himself Sam had come looking for the girl. He swore that was all he knew right before the Whisperer slit his throat. Yes, he'd known a lot of anger in his life, but none as much as when he'd returned that night to find his Angie gone. He needed to rest and make new plans. The Whisperer wasn't stupid, just cold inside with no heart or conscience. He whispered his strange mutterings. He had always spoken in a whisper because he was ashamed of his speech impediment caused by a cleft palate that no one had cared enough to fix when he was a baby. He never uttered a word to the doctors, only muttered his strange prayers. They were all complete fools who had never connected the dots. He would always wear a mask to cover his defect when he was hunting for his girls. He never left witnesses alive. The Whisperer had made his pact with the devil a long time ago. Then he had found Angie, and it was even more special because of who her father was. She was the chosen one. How dare they try to keep her from him? Over the years, there had been so many girls that he could hardly keep count how many lives he had taken. They meant nothing to him other than a means to self gratification. That is, until he saw Angie. She was meant to be with him. He would have her back again soon. He had made so many plans for them. He had so little time with her before that man, Sam, had taken her away, and he would die for that. In fact, they would all pay. Velda, the doctor, and Sam. They would all have to die. The Whisperer thought back to that night. Just the thought of Angie's delicate, pale skin and her long blonde hair was enough to make him break out in a cold sweat. Her beautiful golden eyes had looked at him with such fear, and he started shaking from the excitement of it. He had removed her clothes so he could look at her. He had stroked her and touched her while she lay there unconscious. He relived the moment when he had taken her. The memory of it was so powerful he had to lie down. He knew she would be his. The first time he had laid eyes on her outside her father's medical office. He just hoped no one had contaminated her. He had to be the one to complete the ceremony to make her his forever, and killing anyone who got in his way was no problem. And I'm going to stop there. It's not done by chapters, it's just there's a little white box with a knife in it that separates each section. So I don't know. Let's see, how far did I get through that? 12% through it. So dang. Somebody's wanting us to watch some naked. Put my time out. Alrighty, everybody. So this book is called Scream While I Whisper. I know there's 3 books in the series so far. I saw them when I got this one, but I don't know how many is going to be in the whole series altogether. A lot of times with these kind of thrillers, if they're in a series, they end up just continually grow. So I don't know if Miss Sherry's going to do that or not. Sherry, when you watch this, thank you so much for letting me read it. I deeply appreciate it, and we'll get around to finishing it at some point, along with about 1,000 other books. And tomorrow night we have, I think it's just a novel, thriller novel. Really not sure what kind of book it is. It's called The Nightingale in Europe by Faith Isabel Bloom. And for those that have Book Hub, you can go get that, and Nina will be posting that tomorrow for the live read. So, but tonight's book was $3.99 on Amazon. So go get it, finish reading it, and leave a great review. Otherwise, everyone have a great night and go read something. Happy reading.